Hi everyone, I'm Mark Leeming from the 1 Minute Preacher. I hope your day is going well. Now, with this video, I thought I'd try something just a little bit different and respond to a viewer's comment to one of my videos that I did about 8 to 9 weeks ago called Why Christianity Isn't Racist. In that video, we were looking at Paul's letter to the Romans, where essentially he was addressing a deep racial division within the early Christian community there in Rome, which was along Jewish and non-Jewish lines. Essentially, the Jewish believers of this new movement called Christianity assumed that, given their ancestry, that in the Old Testament, under the Old Covenant, that they were God's chosen people, that God had chosen to reveal himself to the Jews, anyone in the surrounding nations. If they wanted to know God and his ways, then they had to come to the Jews. Salvation was through the Jews. And so, with this early movement of Christianity, these Jewish believers assumed that, well, it was the same thing, that Jews were on top and Gentiles were subservient to them. But the Apostle Paul was writing and saying, no, that's no longer the case. There is no longer this division between Jew and non-Jew or Gentile. All are one in Christ. And therefore, I was arguing that Christianity is not racist. But I had a viewer from Africa, and I find that fascinating. Here I am in my basement in rural Ontario, Canada, and someone from Africa is watching one of my videos. Anyway, he objected and said that Christianity is racist because he gave the example in his home country along the coast is a fortress, which during the horrific slave trading days in the 17 and 1800s, white Europeans would go there. And it could hold up to 1,000 black Africans who were then boarded upon slave ships and sailed across to the Americas. And this viewer from Africa rightly pointed out that the clergy were often involved in this. Ministers and priests would pray and give their blessing to the crews of the slave ships. There's also a church there where those involved in the slave trade every Sunday morning could put on their Sunday best and go and praise Jesus. So according to this viewer from Africa, that is proof that Christianity is in fact racist. Now, there's many things I could address here, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to focus upon a few. The first would be that just because someone claims to be a Christian doesn't automatically make them so. It doesn't mean that they won't necessarily understand its full implications. And I know for those outside of the church, this is going to be hard to wrap your head around. But yes, you can be a minister, you can be a priest who spent years in theological training and still not be a Christian or still not fully understand the teachings of Christ or what Paul wrote. I mean, all you have to do is read the Gospels. Who were Jesus's fierce opponents? It was the Jewish religious leaders of his day. These were men who had spent years in theological training. In fact, in those days, to be a religious leader, you had to have the entire Old Testament memorized. Do you know how big the Old Testament is? And yet they had to have it memorized. They knew it backwards and forwards as a text. But obviously, they didn't comprehend its implications. They had never taken it to heart. So yes, you can be a representative of a religion and yet still not truly represent it. So basically, we come back around again to the question, is Christianity racist or not? I mean, when the KKK burns crosses in the name of Christianity, is that true Christianity? What we need to do is to go back to the source, roughly 1,700 years or almost 2 millennia prior to the slave trade. When you look at Paul's letter to the Romans and all of his other writings in the New Testament, did he or did he not write clearly that the gospel was for everyone? Clearly, Paul very passionately believed that the gospel was for everyone, for all races. And that was a radical idea back then. So much so that Paul got himself into a lot of hot water. You can read in Acts where a church council was called over this very issue. Even though Paul was a Jew, he felt that he was called by God to be an apostle to the Gentiles, to the non-Jews, to take the gospel there. And he faced a lot of opposition over that. Clearly, Paul was not a racist. So I guess to sum everything up, that while yes, Christians can be racist, Christianity itself, the religion, cannot be. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I realize it's a different format and somewhat longer than I normally do. Maybe I'll do a few more just like this. What do you think? Do you have any questions about Christianity? Do you have any thoughts about the Bible you'd like me to try to explain? If so, please leave them in the comments down below. I put out a new video like this well, not quite like this format, but I put out a video every Thursday. So if you haven't already, please do subscribe or like and follow me on Facebook. I'd really appreciate that. That helps me out a lot. So yeah, and I hope to see you next Thursday.